Top 5 matchup number 3 for Ohio State on deck. That's the perfect number for thoughts on a Thursday. 1, 2, 3. The podcast daily is back with Jeremy Birmingham and me, Austin Ward. Berm, your body is falling apart. We have to get a weekly 3 Thoughts Thursday health update.
I don't want to talk about it. I'm fine.
Okay. You're fine.
Eventually, we're all going to die one day, and I just might do it sooner.
Well, everyone is pulling for you. I hope you make it because
I'll be there no matter what.
I know you will be. There's a lot of football left, and a huge one on Saturday against Indiana at noon in the Horseshoe. Let's get right into it. What is one thing, the first thing that you are thinking about Ohio State that nobody else is?
Oh, I don't know that nobody else is thinking about it. I mean, I'm thinking about how challenging this season has had to have been for the brain trust behind the offensive line. Certainly, you go into this year with a pretty good idea of like, we've got a group that we think is not just going to be one of the best in the Big Ten, but one of the best in the country. They've proven that throughout the season, despite, a game or two like the Nebraska game where you looked a little off, but you were replacing your starting left tackle going into that game, and you bounce back, and then you think, hey, we got things righted again, and now you're without your starting center, who's been the best center in the country all year long. And I think it's great when coaches have to earn their money. That's what I think. And Justin Fry and Chip
there might
Kelly,
not be many people thinking that.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking that. I think, hey, it's good that you're proving what your value is, and I'm going to be in the minority when I say it, but I don't go into Saturday's game like all that worried about this loss of Seth McLaughlin as far as how it impacts the Indiana game. Maybe it costs Ohio State 7 points or a drive or two. I don't know. But I was looking through photos as getting ready for snap judgments for you guys on Wednesday night, and I found a picture of of Carson Hinsman. And I just thought to myself, it's crazy how much different he looks as a person than he did a year ago. And I just feel like extremely confident that he's going to be fine as Ohio State center moving forward. And so it sucks and it hurts, but I think that the entire reason you brought in a guy like Seth McLaughlin was so that Carson Hinsman would have someone to learn how to be a professional center from. And I think that it's going to pay off in the long run. Obviously, that's as silver lining-y as I can get when it comes to this injury, but I don't look at it and worry that Carson Hinsman isn't ready for what he's going to be tasked with.
It's a little bit wild to think back. You're mentioning reflections and looking at Carson Hinsman. Just think about how much of the offseason conversation revolved around right guard and right tackle, and could this Ohio State offensive line be good enough to win a national championship? And like, even if you include, because Josh Simmons had come in for his fair share of criticism a year ago, Seth McLaughlin had, had the snapping issues at Alabama. Like, you could almost loop in the entire group outside of Donovan Jackson and be like, that's what we spent a ton of time from the end of last season all the way up until the opener, lumping them in as one of the most scrutinized groups. And then they just go out and they were playing as one of the best, a Joe Moore Award semifinalist, for whatever that's worth. And Josh Simmons answers the bell. Donovan Jackson moves out there. He answers the bell. Seth McLaughlin, he proves that he's one of the best. And you left last week and you were still like maybe a little bit on alert for the right side of the line. But like, if they were considered a question mark and now you're like, man, if they were just fully healthy, there'd be no question Ohio State would barrel towards a national championship.
Yeah. But, as Ohio State fans are used to, like, things happen. This is sports. Guys get hurt a lot. You certainly don't want to see it happen in practice. You certainly don't want to see it happen ever, but it's worse when it happens in practice. It's worse when it happens at the end of the season. It's worse, blah, blah, blah. It's worse when it's, a starter. It's never good. But Ohio State's in a unique position that they are, despite what people consider to be their recruiting weakness on the offensive line in the last few years. I think that they're still depth-wise one of the deepest offensive line groups in the country, and they have talent. And now that talent has to prove it. I mean, Donovan Jackson said it before the Penn State game, right? We just had to drop our nuts, right? Like, time to drop the nuts again. And
Buck nuts.
The buck nuts. Don't drop buck nuts, folks. Those are fine people over there. I mean, you should watch us but you should also watch them. They're fine people.
Oh, I wasn't talking about a website. That's just what the
Oh,
actual,
okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense.
it's just what they're
I'm
called.
wondering, we're just going to keep rambling here. I wonder if, and this is just completely me speculating, when Zen Mahalski got hurt and Luke Montgomery went into the game at left tackle, and not Austin Saraveld, and pushing Donovan Jackson out. And we haven't seen Austin Saraveld really play that much since the games he started. Knowing what I know about Luke Montgomery, I'm wondering if this is an opportunity for him, because his energy is very similar to that of Seth McLaughlin. He's a guy that he's a real vocal guy, rah, very high intensity on the field. And I wonder if there's an opportunity for him to steal a spot here, like Wyatt Davis did when he was forced to come into action at the end of the year when Demetrius Knox broke his leg back in 2018 or 2017. So it's obviously a year later in Luke's development, and I think he should be ready for it. And I hope that someone is ready to drop their buck nuts this weekend. That's really what it comes down to. But I think Luke has a chance to maybe surprise some people.
He's another person, Berm, that looks. I noticed this before the game on Saturday at Northwestern. It really registered, maybe more than previous weeks. Luke Montgomery is starting to look more like a grown-ass man than he did 2 months ago.
Yeah, this is what happens. I mean, kids grow up. He just probably, he's 20 years old now. He's starting to turn into a man. Like these aren't kids. And I think the great thing is that Ohio State has 3 options that they could mess around with here. Again, we feel pretty confident that it'll be Carson Hinsman at center heading into the last part of the season here. But you have 3 options with Luke Montgomery, Austin Saraveld, Josh Padilla, 3 Ohio kids, all from the same recruiting class. Like someone's going to step up, and it's going to suck to not see Seth McLaughlin out there, but it's going to be awesome when someone else steps up, and that's what's going to happen.
So it's funny that you started it that way with your thing that you didn't think anyone else was thinking, because I felt like I must be in the minority because I believe that Ohio State's offensive line is going to be fine against Indiana as well. And if they had to withstand another injury at tackle, I don't feel any level of confidence. And I'm not saying any of this to diminish the importance and the upside. Like Ohio State's potential on the offensive line is not going to be the same again without Josh Simmons and then now without Seth McLaughlin. That's undeniable. That's just the fact. But is it going to lower the floor to a level that Ohio State can't win the rest of the games in front of it? I personally don't think so. And you just rattled off a bunch of the names and a bunch of the reasons why. Ohio State has assembled more quality depth and more experience depth because of Carson Hinsman and because of what Austin Saraveld got early in the year than at any point of any Ohio State offensive line that I have covered. Don't know if historically that's the same case, but everyone, and I mentioned this in the emergency snap judgments on Tuesday night, every single other Ohio State offensive line that I've covered was one injury away from really messing around and finding out something that they wouldn't have liked. And that never happened. It's unfortunate that now they are in that situation in multiple spots right now. But I do think that they're better equipped to handle it and can get through the next 3 weeks. And then whatever else happens after that, we'll see. But I don't think it changes my opinion that this is still a team that can win the college football playoff and a national championship.
No, certainly the ceiling is lowered, as you said. The margin for error is gone, and now you just have to put it all together. And this is why these guys come to Ohio State. It's why they practice. It's why they spend the whole summer and winter and fall and spring killing themselves to make sure that they're ready to play. And so, it's not going to be perfect. That's what you know for sure. It wasn't perfect even with Josh Simmons and Seth McLaughlin out there, but it's got to be good enough to win these next 2 games, because you get to the Big Ten championship game, whatever happens. If you lose to Oregon again, you're still going to get in the playoff. Yep. You got to just go out and take care of business these next 2 weeks. And so that's got to be the focus.
Okay. Thing number 2, Berm, what is a thing that you believe could get Ohio State beat by Indiana?
I think it would be turnovers. I mean, it's obviously sort of a cliched answer, but I believe Ohio State can play a B- game and beat Indiana, even if Indiana plays an A game on Saturday. But you cannot play a B- game with turnovers. You cannot play a B- game and give away possessions. You cannot play a B game and not score when you're in the scoring zones, like missed field goals and stuff like that I consider turnovers essentially. So win the turnover battle with, that is it. So we've seen Ohio State in these games when they get back home after the Nebraska game, the Iowa game, they just they get a little sloppy with the ball. And if you don't do that, I think you win. If you give Indiana the ball, that's going to give them confidence. And that's the one thing that team has a ton of already. You cannot give them reason to believe with any sort of advantage to them in that respect, because that's what they're built on. That's what Kurt Cignetti's entire vibe is. Like, we're gonna come in here, we're gonna be a more confident team. You got to stomp them early, and I think if you give them the ball and give them the chance to start feeling like they belong, then that's where the game gets away from you.
I think, immediately you think about Will Howard's importance to that, and in the pick six against Penn State, and the couple opportunities where he's been, a risk taker with the football. It's like we sometimes get hyper focused on that, and that it hasn't by and large been a recurring weekly surplus issue of turnovers. Like, this team does take pretty good care of the football. I'm not trying to argue your point. Obviously, you have to do that in a top 5 game, whether you consider it a matchup game or not. It's what it is, a top 5 game. And that hasn't really been a recurring issue, or at least one that has not cost Ohio State dearly. Now, they gave away the 2 extra possessions at Oregon, and that did wind up making the difference. So it's twofold there. Will Howard and the running backs protecting the football, and that the Silver Bullets can actually generate some takeaways.
Yeah, and that's it always comes down to that in these types of games. And the reality is Ohio State has taken a lot of chances this year on 4th downs. And so when I'm counting, like, that Nebraska game, the first offensive possession, that's a turnover to me. Like, you get the ball back, you have it at the 30-yard line, and you go for it on 4th and 1 and don't score any points. Like, that to me is a turnover. That's something in a game like this that takes Indiana's confidence and runs it up, up the scale. And I just think you can't do that. So getting to Curtis Rourke early, hitting him early, the kid is like I think I saw a stat on Wednesday. He might be the only passer in the country with an over 80% like grade when he's under pressure. So you have to be able to get to him with the rush, but also that's going to mean that one-on-one situations for Denzel Burke and Davison Igbinosun have to be won. I mean, we've talked about the cornerbacks all week. It's not being talked about for no reason. Like, that is a matchup in this game that is going to determine how the game flow goes. If those guys are getting in the heads of Indiana's receivers early, then I think the Buckeyes can win easy. If Indiana gets that confidence and Curtis Rourke feels like he can just drop back and throw the ball wherever he wants, like, that's going to be a hard thing to slow down. So the pass rush, again, we go back to the Michigan game against Indiana. That game completely turned on its head when Michigan decided to start rushing the passer in the second half. And the Buckeyes need to take that and run with it.
Yeah, you mentioned Rourke, and they have some dangerous receivers on the outside, physical wide receivers. To me, and this won't be news, as you mentioned, the thing that can get Ohio State beat, in my opinion, in this game is pass defense generally, and the cornerbacks specifically. I think I was really interested by the way Ryan Day responded to the questions that I asked about Denzel Burke, and maybe I'm making too big of a deal of it, but if you look at the last 5 games from Denzel Burke, they're very out of character statistically for him. Basically, every pass on him is being completed. Now, some of them are circus catches. Some of them are a little bit fluky. Some of them shouldn't have happened because there was no pass rush. Doesn't matter. They're happening at a level that is not sustainable for Ohio State to win games. And he's not alone at this, because I think that the penalties are a significant concern, even if Davison Igbinosun is often able to erase his own mistakes by himself, which is a really admirable trait and pretty impressive. You can include Jermaine Matthews in this, and not winning every rep, and that's not the standard. But if you get beat like he did on the route that Northwestern had on Saturday, I feel like Rourke and the Hoosiers are more than capable of turning that into a touchdown, which could be costly in a big game like this. So it's probably there's probably some segment of the people watching the podcast daily that are tired of the cornerback conversation, but I'm bringing it up again because it is the single most important matchup, I think, for unit on unit in this game. And the way Ryan Day talked about it, I don't know. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but it felt like a programmed response that Ryan Day, when we talked about Purdue, it's like this is the message that Denzel needs to hear, which is he's going to have a great game on Saturday. He's going to have a great practice this week. And it was like self-fulfilling prophecy and motivation, which is, to me, not the way that Ryan Day normally talks about specific players.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's obviously two ways you can go about it, and standing up there and saying he's not doing what we expect of him. He said they had really hard talks this week. I mean, those private conversations are probably much more valuable than what Ryan Day is saying publicly. But it's clear over the last few weeks that the leash is getting shorter and shorter for Denzel Burke when he's had these plays happen. We saw on Saturday he got beat on a crosser over the middle or a little in route, and immediately the next play he was off the field. So it's extremely important for Denzel Burke to make a play early in this game and get himself some confidence. If I'm going to talk about one thing in this game that I think will be a difference maker that isn't the cliched stuff, the penalties and blah, blah, blah. And again, because I like to bring up the Bengals, if you go back to Sunday night's game against the Chargers for the Bengals, you knew Justin Herbert, what he's been able to do as a passer through his whole career, but they hadn't really seen him do a lot of stuff with his legs in the last couple of weeks and at the end of last year because he was hurt. Curtis Rourke can run the ball. If Ohio State lets him run the ball like they let Dylan Raiola run the ball, that's a major problem. Like, someone has to hit him. If he's going to get out of the pocket, he needs to be hit. You cannot let Curtis Rourke scramble for 3 or 4 first downs in this game on 3rd and long situations. If you do that, you're going to be in a world of hurt on defense. And this defense has been good. They have struggled to get off the field in 3rd and long situations, and a major component of that has been not being able to contain the quarterback run, even for guys that you'd think are not potentially or not expected to be the mobile the quarterback. So figure that out. Put a spy on him. I don't know if it's Sonny Styles who does that or what, but I'm not sure about Indiana's tight end situation, if they got a guy there or not. I know they have 3 good receivers, but you just got to make sure you don't let Curtis Rourke extend plays and beat you that way.
So usually when we get to thing number 3 on a Thursday, I like to get you worked up about something that has been annoying you, but I don't want to do that this week. I want to flip it. I want to go with positive Berm. What is one thing about covering Ohio State this season or recently or today that you are particularly enjoying?
It's going to sound maybe like I'm sucking up or maybe counterintuitive after what happened in the last week plus with the notebook thing. But I really enjoy. I complain about the NIL era a lot. I do enjoy that the NIL era has allowed us to be able to do more with players on the team and get more personal with them. Because I think, the feedback and the response to content like the notebook has been so great because people are getting to see a side of these players that they've never really seen before. And I think that is huge and valuable, not just for us as we cover them and learning more about what makes them tick, but for the fans who root for them. And they can hear us talk at length about how this program is full of really great young men and really good people. But when they can actually see it in the flesh like that, I think it's so much more valuable for everyone. And I'm glad Ohio State sees that and sees the value in it and lets us do it. And I hope that they don't, get restrictive on that because A, they don't really have the authority to do that because if players are wanting to talk, then they're going to talk. B, because as silly as it sounds, because we're in the media, this is a symbiotic relationship in a lot of ways, and we need to make sure that stays going. Like, if you don't want adversarial coverage, you don't want people to sit there and badmouth the program. You want context. You want objectivity. I think in a lot of ways, the best way to do that is to make sure people have the ability to move freely in and out of the program and say, hey, this is what's really going on there.
Well, there's also financial implications for these young men.
Yeah, for sure.
you can't really limit their earning opportunities. That's a good one, since we also just last week were having to talk about inside baseball media opportunities. I think it's really, I don't know that I've said it recently. Watching Caleb Downs play football, I didn't know that it was going to be so fun. Like, I knew he had a great freshman year. I was following all of your coverage of his initial recruitment. I certainly understood what the hullabaloo was about with his potential, but I didn't watch every single snap that he played at Alabama. I saw the highlights and I thought, well, that's pretty good. Nick Saban put this guy out there as a freshman. Of course, he's going to accrue some pretty good stats. And boy, he almost had an interception against Michigan. It didn't quite happen. That would have been a big play. It was like, that was kind of it. And I know in March, in April, you know, you and Bill, you walked out there and you're like, the first day, like, I can't believe that Caleb Downs is wearing this jersey. And I was still at that point like, come on. Good players come through this program literally every year. Lots of them. What is so special about this guy? And hey, it didn't take 10 games for me to come to that realization. It happened pretty quickly. But even without like eye-popping numbers or game-breaking interceptions and touchdowns or playing on offense the way that some of that offseason conversation happened, sometimes he just makes an open field tackle that you're like, I've seen a lot of other safeties completely whiff. And he made it look like it was the simplest play that he's ever made in his life. And I am really enjoying it.
He's awesome. And he was someone that in his recruiting process was always so open and honest about what he was looking for. And it's truly wonderful that it came back around for him to be in Columbus, because I think in his heart of hearts, I think he always kind of wanted to pick Ohio State in a high school and just couldn't bring himself to, because the defense was so bad in 2022 when he was going through his recruitment. But there were a couple moments this season that really stood out to me as far as what he brings that is not necessarily between the white lines. And you saw the tackles against Penn State. You saw the tackle on that tight end screen last weekend, like just stuff that he does where you're like, wow, that's very different. It was the Michigan State game earlier this year. I talked about it on Snap Judgments. He had Jordan Hancock pulled over on the sideline and was in his face, and not like in a I'm better than you way, but like in a let's go. Like, this is the third game of the season, and you've got a transfer being the obvious leader of the defense. And then this past Saturday, Ryan Day alluded to it a little bit during his press conference on Tuesday about how Caleb fights him when he wants to come off the field. I was watching, I think it was the end of the third quarter. So Ohio State was on the sideline, and Caleb Downs, this was right after Ohio State scored their field goal to make it 31-7. Caleb Downs had his helmet, but like Ryan Day was talking to him, and I could tell that it was sort of like, it wasn't like a, hey, this has been great, let's keep going type of conversation. It was a, this is why we're doing this conversation. And Caleb, I could see him getting a little bit demonstrative. And I wasn't sure if maybe he got hurt or something, because like I hadn't seen Ryan Day really get that much one-on-one time talking to a player on the sideline in all the years I've covered Ohio State. And so I was watching him, and he didn't have his helmet in his hand. So in my brain, I'm like, okay, did he hit his head somehow? Did he get concussed? And then I looked over as the Buckeyes are running out on the field, and there's Caleb going back on the field with his helmet. I'm like, oh, okay, so he won. He won. And then he was done after that series, but you could tell like he was fighting to go back into the game to get that other series. And so when Ryan Day said that on Tuesday, it reminded me of that moment, like, oh yeah, like, and that's what you have to want. You have to want guys that are like that on your team, but you also have to have guys like that on your team if you want to have a championship culture. And that is a kid who understands what it takes to win. And the impact he's going to make in his 2 years at Ohio State is going to be felt for a long time.
Well, if the Buckeyes are going to take that culture and win a Big Ten championship, they're going to have to win on Saturday against Indiana. That game is at noon. It's a big noon kickoff, and it's in the Horseshoe. It is a top 5 showdown. We are pumped to bring you full coverage as we roll along here on a Thursday and into Saturday. Still plenty more to come. We'll have some Freaky Friday bold predictions. We've got Buckeye Q coming to break down Sonny Styles. And then once we get to Saturday, the full coverage that you've come to expect. So it's going to be a busy stretch here as we get into the final 2 weeks of the regular season. Again, kicking that off with the Hoosiers' 2-game homestand for Ohio State in Ohio Stadium. Thanks for joining us on the Podcast Daily for a Three Things Thursday. He's Berm. I'm Austin. We'll see you later.